Hello, we're going to make a vocabulary diamond for the words that go with the story we're reading this week, which is My Brother Martin, which is the story that's written by Martin Luther King Jr.'s sister. So, first thing I do when I make a vocabulary diamond is I take my paper and I fold it into 4 squares. So, I do a hamburger, and then I do a hot dog fold. And then I'm going to put an X in every single square. So I go ahead and I'm going to darken this so you can see it. Oops, my pen is dying, of course. I always have problems with pens dying. And my new pen isn't working either. Let's try this one. Okay, there we go. Spot on. And so I'm going to put an X in every square to make my diamond shape. So I just put an X in every square. And by the time I put X's in all the squares, it makes a diamond shape in the middle of my paper. And there we go. See the diamond in the middle? I'm also going to do that exact same thing on the back of the paper too, because I'm going to have 8 words. There's actually even more words than 8, but I always feel like it's better to know 8 vocabulary words really well and study them and understand them than to know 12 or 15 words not so well. So I like to focus in on a few and go deep so that we learn them really well. So I'm just putting an X in each box, and then once I have X's in all the boxes, and you know that in these videos, the reason why I'm putting this all on videos is so that you can pause them, right? Like if you're slower at doing, at putting X's in your boxes, you can pause. You can click pause. Or if you're really quick and you want me to hurry it along, you can click fast forward, right? So our first word that we're going to look at today is disobedience. But I'm going to make sure I put my name on my paper first. And also, you know what I forgot? I forgot to put the lines for the synonyms. So I'm going to put a line here, a line here, a line here, a line here, also on the back. So our first word is disobedience. So again, like we talked about when we were talking about our level system, I think Dr. Martin Luther King was disobedient in a way that caused change, right? Like he wasn't just being disobedient for disobedience sake. And disobedience is a lack, the definition is a lack of obedience. And the synonym that I got when I looked it up was the synonym that I got was defiance. Disobedience is a noun, Anytime you see anything with an "ence" on the end, it's going to be a noun. Um, so in this case, disobedience is actually, because the rules and laws were inappropriate laws, disobedience was a way to make change, if that makes sense. So let's see. If we could say disobedience, let's say you saw a stop sign when you were riding your bike. Generally, it's understood that people are going to stop. But let's say that someone had problems with their brakes and they couldn't stop, right? Then it might be difficult for them to stop, so they're going to disobey, right? You can put a line through this. They're going to disobey if their car has brake problems, right? It might cause them to get in an accident. So disobedience means that you're not really following the rules, and if you can't follow the rules, then that's also a form of disobedience. Our next word is abolish. Abolish is a verb. It means to do away with. Another word for that is annul. Annul means to end something. Our synonym was overturn. Abolish is a word that gets used a lot in regards to slavery. There was a word, people who didn't believe in slavery were called abolitionists, which is another version of this word. Abolishment is another version, and they're all used in regards to slavery and with slavery ending. People who wanted slavery to end, people who felt like slavery was wrong, were called abolitionists. So abolish tends to be, I would say, almost all the time it's used in regards to slavery, right? And when we talk about slavery, we're meaning that slavery in the United States, people were treated like they were possessions, right? Like they were owned. If I had slaves, I didn't have to pay them. I would feed them. They worked for me. They got no pay. Um, they couldn't leave. They worked for me indefinitely. If I owned slaves, if I owned a female slave and she had a baby, I would automatically own the baby too, and I could sell her baby to someone else, and which would make her feel terrible, obviously. So, the abolition of slavery was something that a lot of people in the United States felt strongly about. There were also people who felt strongly about slavery. They benefited from it, and so they did not want to abolish it. So, if we think about slavery, one of the ways that we can think about it is that people were not free to do as they wished, right? They were not free to go where they wanted to go. They were not free to live where they wanted to live. They were not free to make choices for themselves. And if you were a slave and you ran away and they caught you, they would put you in leg irons so that you couldn't run away again. And then you would have to be in leg irons. You could walk, but you couldn't walk easily, right? So we'll kind of use that as our picture because abolish does mostly relate to slavery. Our next word, ironically, is slavery. Slavery is a noun, and it is a state of severe toil. Toil is work, but it's beyond work. It's like super extra hard work where you're just working with your hands and it's exhausting. So, calling this a state of severe toil is a good way of saying it. The synonym is servitude. The United States also, in the 1700s, there were a lot of people that were slaves, and there were also people that were indentured servants. An indentured servant didn't have money, and maybe they wanted to come to the United States. So they would sign a contract that said that they would be somebody's servant for 7 years. But unlike slavery, those people had a choice. They chose to be indentured servants. In many ways, they were not free, but after 7 years, they were free. They could leave after 7 years or after however long their contract was. So, servitude is a little bit of an inexact synonym for slavery because servitude implies that you have choice, right? And slavery, there is no choice. Someone buys you, treats you like a possession, and you have no freedom, right? So, one way of thinking of it is we could draw a little sign. And we could write freedom in here, right? Because if you're a slave, you have no freedom. You can't make your own choices. You are forced to do what the person who owns you wants you to do, right? All right, our next word is example. Example is a noun. It's a thing. And an example is the definition is a pattern or model, right? And I looked up illustration, seemed like a good synonym. You know, when you're reading, we're going to be reading Little House in the Big Woods. And when you're reading that book and you're looking at the pictures that are inside, Little House in the Big Woods has really good illustrations. So if you're learning about how to make butter, it gives you an example. Oops, sorry, that's the light going out. That book gives you a really good example of what a butter churn looks like, right? It gives you an illustration or an example, and it tells you, the text tells you how to make butter. In fact, when we read it in our class, we usually make butter, and we use Ma's recipe in the book. So an example can be a picture, it can be written directions, a person can be an example, right? I'm giving you an example of how to do a vocabulary diamond. Okay, so I'm going to flip. If you aren't ready to flip, I'm giving a little pause right now so that you can hit the pause button. If you're not ready to flip, I'll go like this so you can see all of the words and definitions. And you can hit pause and you can finish. And pause, 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 pause. Ah! And now we're moving on to the next the next part. All right, so I'm going to flip it this way because I did the lines over here. So my next word is segregation. Segregation is a noun. Anything that ends in a tion is always a noun. And it means the act of separating one group from another. Okay. A synonym for that is isolation. So in the story, that was written by Martin Luther King Jr.'s older sister. They're going to talk about about segregation and how it was practiced in the southern part of the United States. The South was not the only part of the United States that experienced segregation. If you lived in California or in New Mexico or Arizona, there was a definite period where segregation was practiced towards Mexican Americans, and it was super harsh. And so segregation meant that you kept people of different races apart. Um, in the southern part of the United States, there were signs that told you this is a white only drinking fountain. And if you were a black person and you walked up to the drinking fountain and you drank out of it, there would be consequences to that. And the consequences could be pretty severe. So most people that lived in the South, most black people, just were kind of afraid. And rightfully so, they were afraid. Because terrible things happen when people disobeyed those rules. And by terrible things, I mean you could be killed for disobeying the rules. So there's a really famous photo that was taken and back in the 1960s, and it was a photo of a swimming pool, and it was a white only swimming pool, and some African American kids, they looked like they were probably in middle school or high school, decided that they were going to swim in the pool. And a man who managed the pool came along and started throwing chlorine into the pool, and he started pouring it like on them for swimming in the whites only pool. And the picture is just such a horrendous picture because you see the look on the person's face that's getting chlorine poured on her, and the look on her face, she can't believe that someone is actually doing that to her. And you, as the viewer looking at the picture, also can't believe that someone would do that. That it's so inhumane that someone would pour chemicals, pool chemicals, directly onto someone just for violating a simple rule of segregation. So there were consequences when people, that's why I think Martin Luther King Jr., why he's such a powerful example of wanting to change the laws, because there were consequences. And obviously he faced the consequences because he was murdered, right? And so it was a definite risk to your life to disobey the rules and laws that were in place. One of the things that there were lots of signs that were up that said white only or coloreds only or Negroes only, so that everybody knew. And one of the things that is super powerful in the story that you're going to be reading is that Martin Luther King Jr.'s parents didn't want him to see. They didn't want their kids to see this. So they avoided showing their kids what these signs look like in town. They avoided going places that had white only signs, right? Because they didn't want their kids to feel like they were less than other children or they were less than white children. And I think that's a pretty powerful thing, because when you see this, a sign that says this, it's an unfair sign and it makes you feel like you're less than just because of the color of your skin, right? So that's one of my takeaways from that story is his parents protected their family from seeing these things. However, the other flip side of that is when Martin Luther King Jr. finally started experiencing racism, it was like a slap in the face because he had been sort of protected from it by his parents. That when it actually happened, he was appalled by it because he hadn't gotten used to it. His parents had protected him from seeing all of these signs and feeling bad about who he was. Our next word is preferred. Preferred is an adjective. It's a describing word, describes a noun. Um, the definition would be one is liked better than another. And favored was my synonym that I. So, definitely in this story, you're going to see that there are people who are preferred and people who are not preferred, or people who get preferred treatment and people who do not get preferred treatment. And the fact that it's based on skin color is a pretty ridiculous thing, right? If one person is preferred over another, that could be because they work really hard, right? Maybe I prefer one student over another because one student works really hard and values their education, right? And maybe another student doesn't really value what we're doing, and so it's a little difficult. The preferment is by effort, right? But to prefer somebody because of the way they look seems a little bit shallow, right? So preferred kind of means that you favor one person or one thing over another. Um, I'm trying to think of a picture that we could draw for that. If we're using it in not a people sense, we could say, I prefer pie. We'll put like a little steam hole in the pie. I prefer pie over. I really prefer pie a lot. So we could say I prefer pie over green beans. If I had a plate of green beans, I'm going to draw a whole bunch of green beans. I eat a lot of green beans, and I'm not really in love with them, but they're good for me, so I eat a lot of them. So maybe we could say that I prefer. My drawing's so bad, we're going to have to say what it is. Right? Maybe you prefer green beans to pie. I don't know. All right, our next word is numerous. Numerous is an adjective. It's a describing word, describes a noun. It means existing in great quantity. Okay. And my synonym, plentiful, was one that I found when I looked it up. So something that's numerous, it means there's a lot of it. So one thing that I feel there's kind of a lot of is if you go to the beach, there's a lot of sand. When you go to a classroom, there are a lot of desks. So we'll draw all of our little desks here. Like we can just draw a classroom. We can say, yeah, classrooms are places where we work on things. We do lots of writing. We do lots of reading. So we need to have desks. I have a desk at my house too because I do lots of reading and writing at my house. You might have your own desk, or you might just have an area where you do your work, right? So, all right, our last word is injustice. So when I have an in as my prefix, it means no, right? So An injustice means that you have no justice. So injustice is a violation of the rights of others. Injustice is a noun. And I put inequity. Inequity means no equalness, right? It means that things are not equal. Again, the in prefix means no, right? That's secret code for no. In this case, no justice, no equity, no equality. So an injustice would be kind of an unfairness, right? So if I said one person has homework, right? If one student has a big pile of homework, big stacks of work they have to do, and here's some books, and here's some binder paper, right? And here's a pencil, and they have all these assignments to do on their desk. And then I said, this person didn't have to do anything, right? You would say, this person would say, that is unfair, right? So injustice is an unfairness. If I said, oh, you're going to have to do extra homework, but the other person doesn't have to do any homework, you would say, that's not fair, right? We all should be assigned the same amount of work that we have to do. So an injustice means you're not treated fairly, right? Not being treated fairly. All right, so I hope that you enjoyed making a vocabulary diamond. I always enjoy learning new words and studying words. It's interesting to me. In fact, a friend of mine told me that there's a organization that will send you an email with a new word every day so that you learn a new vocabulary word every day. And I thought, I need to sign up for that because I love studying words. So this is just our little way of studying 8 words and kind of going deep and learning about these 8 words and how to use them in sentences, how to figure out what they mean, understand their definitions, and also to learn 8 more words, right, by learning the synonyms, similar words that mean the same thing. All right, so I hope you enjoyed that. Talk to you later. Thanks for joining me.